Welcome, welcome. Hope everybody's doing well today on a Wednesday. My voice is getting a little stronger, so we'll do a little bit of reading today. I know on Monday, I asked you to read the first 16 paragraphs. So hopefully you have that under your belt a little bit. I know some people have told me that they have read those, but I realize probably others haven't. I mean, one of those assignments when like the teacher says, "Oh, you should read something," like how are they going to know, right? So hopefully you did read it, so you are familiar with it. But we'll read the first 16 paragraphs today. I hope you like this. Certainly by the end of the week, you're going to be an expert when it comes to Harriet Tubman. I mean, she certainly lived just a crazy life. It looked like during the documentary that we watched yesterday, not a lot of people were working. They were actually watching the documentary. I thought it was really well done. We have a nice background about what happened with her. So now that we have that background with kind of the visuals, I think is going to make it easier to actually do the reading. So we'll get into that. This was written actually quite a while ago. We'll see in the background. So it's not the most straightforward reading. It's not like it was written today, but it's not so bad. It's not like Shakespeare or anything, but they will occasionally use some words, or they'll change the arrangement of the words. So it's a little bit funky to read, but we'll get through it. So let me make this bigger and this small. I actually do want to read the background of the author here, but this is from Harriet Tubman, Conductor on the Underground Railroad by Anne Petrie. And she was born in 1908. So if you remember, I don't know, does anybody remember when Harriet Tubman died, the year from yesterday? I remember, I watched this 5 or 6 times. I remember 4 times in class, probably 5 times. I watched it once before class. So if you don't know, I mean, whatever, you don't. But in 1913, she died in 1913, Harriet Tubman. And one of my grandmothers was actually born in 1909, or how my grandmother says it, 1909. So it's just kind of crazy. Like, I mean, we think of slavery as like a long time ago, but I knew, you're so much younger than me, but I knew people who were born when there were former slaves still living. It's not that far, like 3 generations, I guess. Something like that. And I guess, have you ever heard of this President John Tyler? Up until like last year, maybe still alive. One of his grandsons is still alive. He's like in his 90s, but yeah, kind of crazy. All right. Time messes with you. I don't know if you've ever seen that guy on TikTok. I got rid of my TikTok. It was taking a lot of space on my phone, probably in my brain too. So I'll probably get it again at some point if somebody shares a TikTok with me. But there's this guy. He kind of makes his head really big. He's got a big forehead like I do, but he makes it bigger, like things that will mess with your perception of time. If you don't know that guy's pretty interesting to follow. Anyways, we're talking about Harriet Tubman today, aren't we? Well, we're talking about Anne Petrie right here. So she's the lady that wrote this, but she died in 1997. So a little bit after I graduated high school. Was the first African-American woman to publish a best-selling novel. Her book, The Street, sold millions of, more than 1 million copies. Petrie's grandfather, Willis James, was a fugitive who had escaped slavery in Virginia and settled in Connecticut in the 1800s. Petrie's parents encouraged Petrie to be confident and proud of her heritage by telling stories of her ancestors. These stories later helped Petrie capture the voices of history in her own writing. Yeah, so pretty cool, I think. And I'm not sure if I've said this or Mr. Bim has said this, but if you were a slave living, remember, Harriet Tubman lived in Maryland. Her grandfather, Anne Petrie's grandfather, lived in Virginia. It was a lot easier to escape if you were living in states that were closer to the north, of course. Like if you were living in Louisiana, South Carolina, I think we're going to talk about South Carolina in a minute. That was kind of a unique place to be a slave. One of the worst, I mean, not that any place was good, but some were worse than others. But yeah, you were less likely to be able to escape if you weren't living on one of those border states. Let's get bigger here. So some of the background. Hopefully you know this from Mr. Bim's class. By 1850, the United States had acquired new territory in the West. To calm antagonisms over the legality of slavery in the new states or territories, Congress reached the Compromise of 1850, which said that California would be admitted as a free state and that the citizens of Utah and Mexico territories would decide the slavery issue for themselves. Uh-oh, that's bad. If you remember anything about Kansas, yeah, that's never good. This series of acts also included the controversial fugitive slave law, which denied due process of law to recaptured slaves and set heavy fines for those who aided them. So we've talked all about the fugitive slave law. We don't need to do that. Excuse me. Compromise of 1850. Remember, Compromise of 1820. Anybody? We'll pause right there. Anybody know the importance of the Compromise of 1820, at least for us? Maine became a state in 1820 because of the compromise. You know, you had Missouri came in as a slave state. We came in as a free state. All right, let's go with the railroad runs to Canada. Along the eastern shore of Maryland, Dorchester County, and Caroline County, the masters kept hearing whispers about the man named Moses who was running off slaves. At first, they did not believe in his existence. Stories about him were fantastic, unbelievable, yet they watched for him. They offered rewards for his capture. They never saw him. Now and then they heard the whispered rumors to the effect that he was in the neighborhood. The woods were searched. The roads were watched. There was never anything to indicate his whereabouts. But a few days afterward, a goodly number of slaves would be gone from the plantation. Neither the master nor the overseer had heard or seen anything unusual in the quarter. Sometimes one or the other would vaguely remember having heard a whippoorwill call somewhere in the woods close by late at night, though it was the wrong season for whippoorwills. All right, a couple things here. Overseer, remember this is hang on, I'll just pause. Anybody know? Two things right there. Anybody know what an overseer is? Anybody know what a whippoorwill is? Maybe we had a little discussion there. Excuse me, has my nose. Oh yeah, it's fun. Runny nose on camera. Hopefully overseer, actually a slave that's been given a little power, free labor. Probably the overseer got some perks of some sort, but they were there to make sure that the slaves were working, that kind of stuff. Didn't have to be a slave, but sometimes it is. And whippoorwill, right? It's a type of bird. It actually makes a sound like whippoorwill. All right, but that's probably, as we learned in the documentary yesterday, it's probably the call that they were doing back and forth to each other, like, hey, you ready? Blah, 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 that kind of stuff. All right, next paragraph. We're only on paragraph 3. This is going on 8 minutes. We might not get, we won't rush. I want to get 16 paragraphs in, but we're only on paragraph 3. So whatever, we'll get about 15 minutes of reading in. How about that? So we won't probably get all 16. Sometimes, just want to make sure this is bigger. Now let's make it bigger. Sometimes the masters thought that they heard the cry of a hoot owl repeated and would remember having thought that the intervals between the low moaning cry were wrong, that it had been repeated 4 times in succession instead of 3. There was never anything more than that to suggest that all was not well in the quarter. Yet when morning came, they invariably discovered that a group of the finest slaves had taken to their heels. Unfortunately, the discovery was almost always made on a Sunday. We know that from the video. Thus, a whole day was lost before the machinery of pursuit could be set in motion. The posters offering rewards for the fugitives could not be printed until Monday. The men who made a living hunting for runaway slaves were out of reach, off in the woods with their dogs and their guns in pursuit of 4-footed game. And they were in camp meetings, saying their prayers with their wives and families beside them. So if we look down at that footnote, camp meetings, it was some kind of religious meeting, maybe like a church when there wasn't a church or something like that. But we learned from the movie documentary yesterday that Saturday nights were a great time to escape. You would think if you were a slave owner, like you would be really aware on those nights. But because most of the time, because of religious reasons, there's a lot of religion at this time. Slaves weren't working on Sunday for the most part, probably. And, they just had like an extra 24 hours or so, maybe a little longer than that, 36 hours or so, not quite 48, that they were not unaccounted for, because I'm sure people were kind of watching, but definitely give them some time, give a good head start right there on a Saturday night. All right, make it bigger. Couple more paragraphs here. Harriet Tubman could have told them that there was far more involved in this matter of running off slaves than signaling the would-be runaways by imitating the call of a whippoorwill or a hoot owl, far more involved than the matter of waiting for a clear night when the North Star was visible. In December 1851, when she started out with the band of fugitives that she planned to take to Canada, she had been in the vicinity of the plantation for days, planning the trip, carefully selecting the slaves that she would take with her. She had announced her arrival in the quarter by singing the forbidden spiritual, Go Down Moses, Way Down to Egypt Land, singing it softly outside the door of a slave cabin. Late at night, the husky voice was beautiful, even when it was barely more than a murmur borne on the wind. Once she had made her presence known, word of her coming spread from cabin to cabin. The slaves whispered to each other, ear to mouth to ear, Moses is here. Moses has come. Get ready. Moses is back again. The ones who had agreed to go north with her put ash cake and salt herring in an old bandana, hastily tied it to a bundle, and then waited patiently for the signal that meant it was time to start. There were 11 in this party, including one of her brothers and his wife. It was the largest group she had ever conducted, but she was determined that more and more slaves should know what freedom was like. So, of course, you can imagine 11, the largest. If you're trying to be secretive, the bigger the number, the more likely it is you're going to be caught. So, excuse me. My voice is holding out a little bit better than I thought. All right, top 10. She had to take them all the way to Canada. The fugitive slave law was no longer a great many incomprehensible words written down on the country's law books. The new law had become a reality. It was Thomas Sims, a boy, picked up on the streets of Boston at night and shipped back to Georgia. It was Jerry and Sadrich, arrested and jailed with no warning. She had never been in Canada. The route beyond Philadelphia was strange to her, but she could not let the runaways who accompanied her know this. As they walked along, she told them stories of her own first flight. She kept painting vivid word pictures of what it would be like to be free. But there were so many of them this time. She knew moments of doubt when she was half afraid and kept looking back over her shoulder, imagining that she had heard the sound of pursuit. They would certainly be pursued. 11 of them? $11,000 worth of flesh and bone and muscle that belonged to the Maryland planters. If they were caught, the 11 runaways would be whipped and sold south. But she'd probably be hanged. All right, we got how are we doing here on time? Oh, I made it small. Sorry. Be better if it was bigger, right? I was worried about that. I almost stopped thinking like, oh, is that small? So you got to see way too much of my forehead there. I think we can probably finish the last 3 paragraphs on this page. Be a good stopping point for us. So remember what we said earlier, the further south you were, the harder it was to escape. So likely if these 11 slaves are caught, they would be sent further south because they were escape risk. $1,000 a slave time. I think I mentioned in a couple classes yesterday, one of my college professors when I was at the University of Alabama said that owning or buying a slave, I guess, a good slave, one that could work really well. Excuse me. Right after this, I'm going to blow my nose. You don't need to see that on camera. It would be about the price of a really good car, which is kind of awful to think about when you're talking about people. But yeah. And we talked about yesterday, it's just equipment on the farm. That's how most slave owners thought of their slaves. And of course, there are exceptions and whatever. But yeah, awful stuff. Actually, yeah, let's finish this here. And the rest of the time you probably will have. How about that to to work. Hey, the speeches, the persuasive, I forgot to call it, persuasive techniques. Only 10 people have started it. So that's due Friday. So there'll be definitely some time in class to work on that. But let's finish these last 3 paragraphs here. 4 paragraphs. That's not too much, right? Hopefully you're still sticking with me here. They tried to sleep during the day. Make sure it's big here. Yeah, it is. You don't need to see my face that much. They tried to sleep during the day, but they never could wholly relax into sleep. She could tell by the positions they assumed, by their restless movements, and they walked at night. The progress was slow. It took them 3 nights of walking to reach the first stop. She had told them about the place where they would stay, promising warmth, good food, holding these things out to them as an incentive to keep going. When she knocked on the door of the farmhouse, a place where she and her parties of runaways had always been welcomed, always been given shelter and plenty to eat, there was no answer. She knocked again softly. A voice from within said, "Who is it?" There was fear in the voice. She knew instantly from the sound of the voice that there was something wrong. She said, "A friend, with friends." The password on the Underground Railroad. The door opened slowly. The man who stood in the doorway looked at her coldly, looked with unconcealed astonishment and fear at the 11, disheveled. That's a good. It's good. Anybody who's like their hair is a mess, disheveled. That's a good word to know. Disheveled runaways who were standing near her. Then he shouted, "Too many, too many. It's not safe. My place was searched last week. It's not safe." Slammed the door in her face. All right, so I'm sure that had the fugitive slave law had something to do with that. If you were caught aiding runaway slaves, the penalties were that much more harsh. All right, rest of the time, some work you could do. I will come around again, still not getting too close. But if I can help in any way, I think the speech is going to be kind of tough, right? Especially the one where you pick your own speech, but not your own. You don't have to make up a speech, but from one of the 3 choices there, President Obama's, JFK, MLK. If you need any help, let me know.